Tim, Brett and Tim, Brett, Tim and Brett and Tim, Brett and Tim, this is not them.
Hello and welcome to Discord Game Club, a podcast about a podcast where two veteran game devs talk about games from the past and their relevance and impact today. My name, of course, is Artemage, and I'm joined by my co-host, a man who photoshops himself into Hangouts he definitely did not attend with me,
Mark Garcia. Hey, Artemage, how's it going?
Not bad. How about you, Mark?
Oh, doing all right. Taking a quick break from parenting stuff, and just happy that we're getting this rolling.
Absolutely. So, for those of you who should be aware of us by now, if you're active in the Dev Game Club community at all, we are regular audience members and contributor of things. Some of you may know Mark for his creative endeavors and major support. You might know me for my good-natured harassment and abuse, but that's basically what we are. And this is a way to give the guys a break without having to fully break the podcast flow on their feed if they want to. If not, you'll find this somewhere else. And just to basically have the community have a chance to say thanks from some of the regular contributors in forums such as email, Discord, and on the stream audiences. So with that in mind, why don't we go ahead and really introduce ourselves here. Mark, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Sure. So, I guess a little background with regards to me, both just from a gamer's perspective as well as like a development perspective. I got into video games at a very young age. My dad had a ton of old like ColecoVisions and things like that floating around, and Atari 2600. And so I was very intrigued and interested in video games in general. Being a child of the 80s, the collapse had already happened, and then we got back in with the NES. So I found myself playing a large number of NES games and then eventually transitioning into Genesis when it came around. As a kid, the first video game I ever beat, and I recall beating all by myself, no cheats, nothing, was Mega Man 2. And then played through primarily fighting games, sports games, until I got to college, and then I started kind of expanding out to RPGs, both Western and Japanese RPGs. So I've just been playing games for a really long time, and haven't really developed a ton of games. I'm a more traditional software and website developer, but this year finally dipping my toe into the waters, and I've started development on my very first game. It's a rendition of what was a Tiger Electronics game called Lights Out. And so that's coming along slowly but surely right now, and I'm really excited to kind of see where it goes. And then outside of that, my introduction to the cast, since I do love games as much as I do, it was the Final Fantasy IX series that got me hooked. It was mentioned on, I believe, Kotaku Split Screen or Game Informer. I can't remember which. It might have been Split Screen if I recall correctly. And when I heard about it, I was looking for more podcasts, pulled it up, listened to these two guys talk through the Shakespearean kind of aspects of Final Fantasy IX, listened to one of the guys not actually beat the game, didn't realize at the time that was going to become a trend, but it was just a really, really cool introduction. It got me hooked. It seemed like just from the general good nature and the ribbing that happened between the hosts along with their extensive knowledge, it just felt like this really intimate kind of cast where I would love to have like a beer with the guys and just pick their brains about their journey through the industry. And yeah, it was totally welcoming. And I really do kind of love to see the community that's been built off of just these two guys who wanted to kind of share their experience.
So so
that's me.
Something I want to pick up on a little there is you mentioned pretty heavily on the sports and fighting game scene there early on. So was there a big draw to the competitive aspect of these things for you?
Not so much the competitive aspect. It's just, I think it was really kind of a sign of the times. Like when I was growing up in the 90s in America, like Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat were the games. And I didn't really care so much for the competitive aspect, just so much as these are really cool games. They're unlike anything I've seen. And then on the sporting side of things, that's really when like NBA Jam and then like the NBA Live series and Madden NFL kind of took off. And those were like, a lot of my friends were into sports. I was kind of at the age in junior high where it was like, hey, everything is sports if you want to be cool. And so that kind of influenced what I wanted to do when I played video games.
Yeah.
So, you know, I haven't really been a competitive gamer in most of my approaches. I'd say Overwatch and Halo were the most recent things where I really wanted to get into competitive pieces. I'm more of a collaborator, but yeah, that's why I got interested in those games.
I definitely grew up in a similar era where sports was like the thing to be cool, and obviously Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat were big standouts in my growing up. Just like when it came to sports games, I only really got into NBA Jam, as you mentioned, and before that, Blades of Steel. I mean, that was the best fighting game on the NES, let's face it.
Yep.
So,
yep, 100%. I love Blades of Steel.
I can't find an NES gamer who does not. So, why don't I return the favor and touch on my background a bit? Much like you, growing up mostly in the 80s and into the 90s, my parents had an Atari 2600 growing up. A small selection of games there. Two that really stood out to me were Pitfall and Missile Command. And I still go online and find versions on the web of Missile Command all the time, just as a time killer, because that game is very brilliant in simplicity. So that's where I started off. Like you, also grew up with an NES and then into a Genesis instead of an SNES. And just kind of whatever smatterings we picked up along the way there. As I've mentioned in emails I've sent to the cast, I grew up pretty rural, so there wasn't a lot around, so video games were my primary pastime. Didn't as much get into the sports games beyond the ones I just mentioned, just because I would rather go out and actually play the sport than fake play the sport for the most part. Like, if I had the right person to play with and they wanted to play a sports game, that could make it, and that was kind of an exception. Was pretty late into PC gaming. Like, my uncle had a Commodore 64 growing up. Well, when I was growing up, rather. And that was my first experience on, like, the differences between PC and console games back in the day. And then from there, just, like, the lines became more and more blurred as the technology advanced. And that's still where my focus was, though, is just whatever gaming I could get my hands on. And over time as well, discovering some of the more in-depth tabletop games. I branched out into gaming broadly, so gaming has just been a big part of what I do. Beyond that, there has been some interest in martial arts. I used to be competitive with that. I cycle a lot, but that's not what we're here for. The big thing beyond that is when I was getting into the idea of development, I intended to go into both design and development for games, so some sort of awful Brett-Tim hybrid that I think we can just look to Brett's Halloween costume as an example of how that would turn out. And this was me going into college just ahead of the 2008 recession, where I actually had a prof pull me out of class one day and ask me why I was there and tell me I was basically wasting my time for a piece of paper. Dropped out of college, got a job in IT, and then that recession hit, and guess which jobs were typically first on the chopping block?
A lot of the IT ones.
Yeah, and it took the wind out of my sails for IT, but I was still, like, working on some game projects. Like, we had a big mod idea with some guys I met online in college where we were going to continue Firefly as an episodic mod series. This was just ahead of Valve doing the Half-Life 2 episode things. And just through life experiences and things like that, there were people dropping off. I was able to maintain the assets for anything that was connected to the mod, and they were able to hang on to it for their portfolios and stuff like that in creation. But then also because of low income and having lost that job, the hard drive with all that stuff crashed and all that was lost, and that took the wind out of my sails for game development. But looking at the state of the industry these days, like, as much as Brett and Tim romanticized the days before where it was just, like, pretty fantastic, like, Brett talked about getting into a senior programming job as his first one just because that's what his salary demands called for at LucasArts. Whereas these days, it'll just be like, no, you're just kind of a contractor, and we'll be rid of you in 6 months after we've worked you to death through crunch. So I don't feel too terrible having missed out on that train. And I still find, like, a lot of the things in development interesting, just I have no interest in pursuing that professionally any longer. So that's where it's kind of gone for me.
Quite the journey. Kind of, your story reminds me too, like, I started originally as a biology major and then went on and got a master's in cellular and molecular biology. So I was not intending to be any kind of developer when I first started out. I figured I was going to do lab work for the entirety of my career. and yeah, pivoted pretty quickly from that too. So it's nice at the very least, I think, that whether you wind up working in the industry or not, like, gaming seems to have so much that allows us to kind of come back to it and express ourselves, even if it's not through like development 100%. Like, you know, one of the things I do love that you do and promote on the cast with the guys is your Drunk Souls every single year.
It hasn't been
I do love
every
that.
single year thing. That started in 2019 and then saw 2 last year. One just because I was testing a rule change, and the other one just because that was the primary event. Because first year, like, it had to see a lot of shit just because the format changed day up because the person I was supposed to play with had to cancel. So the second year, and it's like, okay, if you're drinking some of these very hard liquors as soon as you die, this could be bad quickly. So let's reconsider this.
R.I.P. your liver. It's quality entertainment for the rest of us, but
well, R.I.P. Brett's liver too, because during the revisit last year, Brett decided, you know what, I'm going to try and catch up to you. I'm like, Brett, no, no,
no, Brett, no. Oh man. Well, beyond like the games we've enjoyed playing growing up, the experiences we've had, who we are, everything, like, we're here because we both are major fans of the cast.
Absolutely.
And
touching
we
on
really
that,
enjoy it.
Touching on that, actually, the first thing that actually got me, and was pure accident, where I discovered the cast because Robin Miller tweeted about his interview for the cast, and that was my very first episode.
I love, and this would be something really fun in the Discord. I know some people have already engaged in this, but finding out all of the different tangents that brought people to the cast. Not necessarily even like the first episode, but, oh, I heard it from this, and I know we did it a long time ago when the Discord was first getting going, but it'd be interesting to kind of revisit that and find out what got people into listening to the cast. If it was just an offhanded remark, or if they were just searching on iTunes or wherever they get their podcasts and they found it. I'd be really interested to hear that too.
Yeah, thinking back to how most of the podcasts I've stumbled across have been purely stumbling in some form like this. Like, I can't think of anything where I've sought it out because it's been mentioned, aside from like within a particular podcast or somebody I know personally mentioning it out of like a shared interest. But like anything that I've introduced others to, it's been like just happenstance. Like, one that I used to listen to a lot and miss was called VG Empire. It was done by Games Radar and talked about video game music in particular series, and I stumbled across that like right at the start. So that was pure happenstance. Other ones, it was more like a case of looking up a thing I was interested in, like the Prime Matrix game I play, Infinity. I was looking up media on that, and the podcast 012, which eventually some of the hosts branched off to my cast, which is now defunct, came along with. But it's always been like some sort of accidental thing for the most part.
Yeah, that's kind of been my trajectory as well. Is it's either accidental, it is somebody who knows one of the hosts promotes their show when they're talking about a game offhand, and and that kind of is how it goes. Every once in a while there might be a Discord or a Reddit thread I was in where people are saying, what's your favorite podcast, and I'll find a new one, but on the whole it's typically through listening and word of mouth for me. So yeah.
So this podcast has been going on for quite a number of years now, with quite a number of episodes and quite a number of series. So at this stage, why don't we each pick one or two series that really stood out to us as something to remark on? Why don't you go ahead and get started there, Mark?
Yeah, I'm going to be a little self-indulgent here.
That's what we're here for.
The Mario 64 series was a fascinating series for me for multiple reasons. One was it was actually the very first series where I had an email that I wrote into the hosts and had it answered on air. And the other part was Tim and Brett's insight into the game. And some of the anecdotes they had were really, really interesting to me. Specifically the one where they were talking about Shigeru Miyamoto first getting the camera to work and behave in a certain manner by having Mario chase the rabbit through a maze.
Yeah, that was a really cool story.
Yeah, the whole concept of that being like, this is the proof of development that we need so we can continue building this game is just one of those remarkable things for me. And so that stuck with me. And just also the general enthusiasm that the guys bring to the cast in those episodes were great. If I was forced to pick another one I really did enjoy was the Ocarina of Time series. It went for so many episodes, and every single episode was just like, it was kind of like a treat. Obviously, for me, again, if I'm being self-indulgent, there was a lot of great Photoshop material that came from that for Tim, and then eventually Brett as well. But on the whole, that was a great series. I loved both of those. Honorable mention for me would be Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, mostly for the developer interview that happened at the end of that, where we learned how crazy the camera was in that game to make it work the way it needed to work.
Yep.
So those are some of my high points, but I mean, it's when you're talking about a show that is as quality filled as this one is, it's hard to pick those. And even if I'm saying those are my favorites, I mean, there are several others I could swap in with them. What about you, Armage?
It's definitely not saying there's like a dearth of quality there. Before I get into my own, I should mention like a concept that just occurred to me is those Photoshops you used to share on your Twitter. Since we're kind of doing the Discord to migrate from that, you should probably start like a non-responding thread to post those too, because I think a lot of people.
Yeah,
so, especially
I got to get back to actually doing them.
Especially with one like where you had Tim with like the prince's hair, and then it just went to bald Tim.
Yeah, I could rewind time. That one was great too because I posted the web app that made that one work right when they were recording, and so if you do go to the end of their Sands of Time episode, you can hear Brett just get completely flustered when he finds that posted online in real time. It was a delight. But yeah, I do need to get those all consolidated into a channel somewhere on the Discord, so that if people want to go back through and look at them, they can, and then I can also just continue to add to them when I get back to photoshopping.
So speaking of the Sands of Time one, though, it's definitely one of the ones that stands out to me. That was a favorite game of mine at the time, primarily for its story focus, while still maintaining like an action platformer game with some decent puzzle portions, and it allowed me to let them revisit factors on a series in God of War, which is a game and series that I really did not have any favor towards. It just seemed like edgelord Sands of Time to me, and I was not here for that. You can go back and listen to my email in those episodes if you want further details on that, because I don't want to revisit it all here. But just going through all that, hearing them experience the story and talk about like some of the cultural influences and such, as well with the talk with Remy in regards to the camera, it was just really in-depth and cool to hear about. Another one that I think really stands out to me, though, is the long exploration series of Morrowind, because that is such a deep, in-depth game where there is so much that you can go over. There are so many things that you can miss. Like, as I think it was Brett said, by like third episode, they're basically playing two different games at that point. And so you can have that exploration while still exploring the mechanics, the systems, and if you ask me, that was definitely the big turning point for the Elder Scrolls series. Like, while Daggerfall is probably the best from a gamer point of view, from a general audience point of view, Morrowind, I would say, is the best, even with its hiccups and the Bethesda-ness. Like, it's definitely got things in depth there, and has that nice touch where you look at things like your journal and it tells you, hey, go east, and you don't have like the map marker, you just have this way is east. And I like things like that. I like the self-discovering things like that. Like, I think it was Rasputin on YouTube. I was following a video from where he talked about mini-maps being too useful. It just becomes more so you follow the mini-map than you do the environment and things like that. So I feel it's a great representation of that. Because, yeah, you still have your compass, but you don't have the compass pointing what's the terrain beyond that. So that's why in cases with like Breath of the Wild, I haven't touched Tears of the Kingdom yet, so I can't speak to that. I will turn off most of the HUD and just experience the basics for it.
You know, I love that you mentioned that, because I remember one of the most profound moments for me in gaming, period, was with Grand Theft Auto 4. And it happened when they promoted the idea that you were going to be using the cell phone throughout the game. And the entire time you're playing the game, you're using the cell phone. And then one of the missions, the bullet point initially, and they don't give you any hints initially, just the bullet point was, you need to get a cop car. And so I started out exactly like I would have in GTA 3, running around looking for a cop car. And then I was like, I wonder if I can just dial 911 on my cell phone and a cop car will come to me and I can steal it. And it did. And for me, it was one of those magical moments where it's like, okay, the game just gave me a sandbox of some sort and told me these rules that you know as a person are true. Play with it and see what happens. And you talking about like not having a waypoint, having to actively seek out that thing. Same reason why Morrowind and the cast on it was so amazing, was just hearing those types of moments as you're building out those pieces and you're playing the game.
Yeah, things like that for GTA 4 are definitely why it makes the best of them to me, because it's got a robust character-driven story, but it's also like the way you expect things to act in reality reasonably. It reacts here like, sure, there's a lot of arcadiness and gaminess and abstraction because it is an arcadey, abstracted action game. You want some of that, but like you can point a gun at somebody in a driver's seat who's driving along, and they'll just stop, hands up, and get out of their car or things like that. Whereas like in GTA 5 now, you try that, you're going to get run over. And it's like that doesn't make sense. So some of the rules have changed, and like, well, there are plenty of people who've enjoyed the game, and great for them. I haven't had a lot of draw to go to GTA 5, and recently did some revisit of GTA 4. Still haven't completed it, so it's a game I really need to put some real time into to finish.
But sorry, I got you off on a tangent there. So you were talking about Morrowind and the Prince of Persia. Did you have any other episodes you wanted to touch on?
In terms of like in-depth series, like I could go back to Baldur's Gate because that was the first one that really got me feeling like I should get involved here, because I mentioned how I encountered Baldur's Gate before I actually got a chance to play tabletop D&D. So it was a big introduction to me, and so when it came to things like understanding the rules such as Thaco and whatnot, it's like, I have no idea of any of this. This is my introduction here, reading this thick instruction booklet that is almost twice as wide as my thumb at the time, because it was that spiral bound one that was just amazing and good to hold.
Awesome.
So as I did mention, though, at the beginning of this, though, this is really about the community giving their thanks and appreciation to Mark and Tim here, and I did reach out to some of the regular contributors within... Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to hold up Brett and Tim. You said Mark and Tim. While Tim and I have collaborated on several projects, I do believe that Brett and he have contributed much more.
Wonder how I made that slip up. So I did reach out to some of the regular emailers, Discord interactors, Twitch audience members that were in the Discord that I could reach out to for some topics and some feedback and things like that. So why don't we get to some of those here, Mark?
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and start with our good friend Johnny Pockets. Johnny Pockets, just FYI, I still owe you a DM. You had asked me a question. I'll get back to you. It's just been crazy with two kids. He asks about ludonarrative dissonance. Specifically, what are some of your favorite, most jarring examples from the cast and why? Are there any games that have stretched your ability to accommodate? And do you think the dissonance is inherent in games? If you cover this topic, I think it's worth rehashing the definition. I always forget what it means. I am sure I'm not the only one. Okay. I can field the ludonarrative dissonance if needed, so that people can be reminded.
Sure.
Essentially, ludonarrative dissonance is where the motives and essentially the lore or any of the backstory or disposition of the character you are playing does not seem to coincide with their actions. There is a dissonance that's occurring there between this. So if the character is a pacifist who in every cutscene and every story that's told about them has always resolved things peacefully, but they're running around with a machete and hacking people, that is ludonarrative dissonance. I think one of the best examples of that, not from the cast, but in general, that people always love to point to is Nathan Drake. Constantly, cutting up one-liners, being this super chill and happy guy, and then you get to the heart of it and realize he's murdering people while he is basically just giving you one-liners.
See, I just took that as the action movie kind of guy. It's like his whole state of cope. He's like, if I don't just make jokes about this, I'm gonna have the worst trauma for the rest of my life, and I'm gonna be a non-functional adult, and I'm barely functional as is.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things, and I don't think that necessarily a game is always about ludonarrative dissonance. I just feel like there might be times where there is ludonarrative dissonance. I think GTA 3 is a great example of it. I know that your character, for the most part, is supposed to be a little more on the bad side of things. You start out in a prison transport vehicle, but at the same time, because your protagonist is quiet and is supposed to mirror a lot of your intent, when you go into missions and you actually have to do bad things to accomplish a goal, it might present you with some of those feelings of ludonarrative dissonance where you're like, I'm this quiet, composed, intellectual person projecting yourself onto the main character, but here I am having to do these horrible things that I don't necessarily agree with. So I think GTA provides itself with a lot of those kinds of aspects of ludonarrative dissonance. What do you think, Artemij? Any examples from the cast or examples in gaming that you can think of that kind of stand out for you?
The big example I thought you were going to point out that people like to talk about was the 2012 Tomb Raider reboot, because a lot of people were mentioning that just because Lara Croft is in there like primarily an intellectual. She's got no real experience in like any of this combat things and such as that. But like here she is just like headshotting people left and right. She forms a bow out of tree limbs and just starts sniping people. It's like, at the same time, she still has been like some sort of debutante here who has had a very privileged upbringing with a lot of education beyond just the scholastic, so I understand how that could come along. I didn't find it as jarring, but I understand where people do find that pretty jarring. So I guess from there, like if you want to connect that to the cast, you could say their bonus episode of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which was a sequel to that one.
Yep. Yeah.
Beyond that, like the one that I find is a big source of ludonarrative dissonance, but that might also just be like poor design from the game and its series overall, is Shenmue. Because you're this like, 15, 16, 17-year-old Japanese kid whose father gets murdered because of some MacGuffin where you get very little details, and like the majority of the game, like it seems like it's going to be this investigative thing, and it becomes, go drive a forklift. That is the majority of the game. Go drive a forklift. You now have a job in the game that you play to get away from your job. And like, it's like there's a way around that because they provide a lot of establishment. Because like your father still had a student who was clearly like a teacher at the dojo. You could have the dojo still bringing in money, so he doesn't have to go work this job. Like the connect there between Rio having that job and the progression of the plot was tenuous at best. So maybe make that an option, but not a primary way, a necessary way. I don't know, that one bothered me, and that's why I have not finished that game.
Yeah, in going the opposite route, there have been a couple of examples of not necessarily like ludonarrative dissonance, but I guess whatever the inverse of that is, which is probably harmony, that I think take things up and elevate it a little more. I think Eternal Darkness is a great example of bringing atmosphere and also adding in some of the minor touches that make that game just more unsettling and creepy. And the original Silent Hill, as I recall, also had things like the main character would shake while holding the gun, giving you the impression that this is not going to be a person who can just headshot and one-off enemies left and right. So yeah, I mean, I think that there can be times where it's jarring, but then I don't think it really takes me out of the moment so much, because to a degree, I'm viewing the character in the game in some regards as an extension of myself. So I'm like, oh yeah, I can make that one shot because I did this, and that makes sense to me. But yeah, other times, who knows?
Yeah, I can certainly understand with Eternal Darkness, especially when like all the characters, as well as having different like equipments and things like that, they didn't all respond the same way in terms of using their similar equipment. So somebody stumbles across like a machete or a sword and they didn't come with it initially. They're not a trained soldier like the guy that you start off with, who's like the Roman legionnaire. He's super comfortable with the sword. He's very effective with it, whereas everyone else is just kind of like, I'm going to hack and hope to take off your limb. And you can feel that in the way that they respond to the controls and their animation and everything else. So that was a great presentation of that.
Yep, I agree. Well, that wasn't the only question that Pocket sent us, so I'll let you field the next one.
Right, so Pockets wanted to know a few things here, but some of these can get pretty in-depth. But I think something we really have to touch on here, because it's very defining for the cast, is the definitions and many meanings of Tim's use of, geez.
Do you want to take this one first, or do you want me to go first?
Why don't you go first, because I get the feeling you've got something that stands out right now.
Well, so like this takes me back to high school because my principal in high school was very, very disheartened by the fact that we kids at the time were using slang terms. And so my junior year of high school, they brought out just a paper, like a poster, that had all the slang terms and what we actually meant to say. And so, like, for example, at the time, a really, really famous expression that we would use slang-wise was "aight," and the translation into lay terms that he had there that we should use so we could be more presentable to job offers and things like that was "I agree," or "okay." But the funniest one to me was he had a list of expletives that were obviously with like the asterisks and exclamation points in them, so you couldn't tell. You knew what they were, but you couldn't see the whole word. And the translation was, "This activity has overwhelmed me so much that I cannot formulate any other words to express my enjoyment of it." And so for me, "aw geez" means this activity has overwhelmed me in a way where I cannot express in any other terms my enjoyment or my discouragement of it. And I have to use both of those because Tim occasionally uses "aw geez" in kind of a playful and just like he's laughing about something so much. And in other times, it's more of the heavy "aw geez." So
Sometimes
that I believe is mine.
Sometimes I feel like it is Tim censoring himself just because he's like, I don't want to like turn this cast explicit, but I don't really have a sentence here that I can insert off the top of my head that will like, convey how I feel about this. Other times it's just like, I'm already using this phrase, I may as well use it in the positive as well. I mean, it's just like dropping an F-bomb. It can be both positive and negative, and so that's where Tim brings it in.
I mean, what I want to do for the merch store is drop in "aw geez" to one of those word cloud generators, just "aw geez" a bunch of times, and then just it literally only has like the two branches of the word cloud. I'll turn that into a shirt.
Merch store can be found in the show notes, by the way. So look
yes,
for it there. Mark is overseeing that consistently. All right.
Yep.
So the next contributor we have here for our community-provided content is from Belmont, who is regularly in the Discord. I'm going to read this verbatim here. So I was inspired by the series to replay Mega Man X. The duo had a hard time with this game, which left me feeling like they had played it wrong. However, it had been over a decade since I had played it, so I had to find out for myself. I feel like they missed that levels were intended to be replayed. Turns out they did miss the fact that replaying the levels was intended. I'm not slighting the cast at all, but I find the idea of developers missing out on the intention of their peers and interesting, and how that might shape games they go on to make. Not sure if there's really anything to discuss here, but I've been thinking about it for a while now, so if that is something interesting for the Pirate Cast to talk about, I'd love to hear the discourse. And that was indeed something I noticed myself, is the guys would go into a level and then not come back. I think that came in part, though, from the language that the original Mega Man series conveyed, where you went to a level and you couldn't go back. So while in, I think, Mega Man 2 at least, and certainly Mega Man 3, if you beat certain levels, it would change the way other levels would play out. You couldn't go back and then revisit it. It was locked off to you because you'd already defeated that robot master. So I think that was, in part at least, if not primarily, a lack of that being represented well in the game's already provided language, and the platform change didn't really convey that. Where do you stand on that one, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I do think they played Mega Man 2 so closely, and in the Mega Man 2 podcast, if I'm remembering, they had a discussion about whether or not you could go back to the levels.
They did.
So I feel like it kind of trained them in that way to think this is the way. I think the other part of it, too, is the argument that, you know, as Tim and Brett have discussed in length, how games have gone from not necessarily hand-holding and tutorializing aspects of them to doing that. Like, Mega Man X does an exceptional job of tutorializing that very first level that teaches you everything you need to know about how you play through a level, but it doesn't do so much of that in regards to showing you, the player, that you can go back and replay levels later. I think if there had been some visual cue on the level select screen when you beat maybe, say, for example, what is it, Ice Penguin? Chill Penguins. Chill Penguins level. If there had been some indicator that Flame Mammoth's stage had changed, like a flashing or something that would draw your eye there, then you might be like, oh, this has been changed. You know, can I? And then if you had gone to Flame Mammoths beforehand, beaten it, then gone to Chill Penguin at a later time and come back to the level select screen, and you still see that flash happen, that might have indicated to you something is going on here. I need to go inspect it and investigate. So to a degree, yeah, I can see Belmont's point, but at the same time, I think from a development perspective, we've come a long way in giving players indications to let them know, hey, this is something you can go back and do again. It's a reason why we see New Game Plus pop up in a menu after you've beaten the game to let you know this is an option. That's a very, very obvious one. But there are other indicators, whether it's the white or yellow trail that leads you through a level, or just other visual indicators that can draw the eye to let you know, hey, you can go do something or manipulate this piece here again. So I think it's okay for the guys to have missed that, because I don't think that the language of the game was clear in presenting that to them.
No, it definitely was not, and it's entirely understandable how they came across this. It's unfortunate for their play experience, as well as like the audience experience for relating to it, but like I said, it was pretty much not established in like the franchise beforehand that was a possibility. Though I will say that the Mega Man games, even going back to the NES, have done a pretty good job of tutorializing broadly, because most times, even though you could select the levels in any order, the first time you encounter any enemy that really changes things up, you get a sense of what it's going to do before you directly have to interact with it. So it was very helpful for that without being hand-holdy. It's very much a show, don't tell. And if you want more details on that, Eagle Raptor certainly did quite the great coverage on tutorialization in the Mega Man series. We'll link that in the show notes too.
Awesome.
So I think
all right,
you're up next.
Let's see. My turn. All right, the next community member that we're going to be highlighting here, who sent us some material, is Kyle and Error, formerly known as Vermin, as Tim always refers to him. He's a Tim Stream audience member when Tim actually streams.
He does
I'll be
that?
getting Discord updated. I know, right? Tim was a streamer. It's been so long since Tim streamed, and this is where you say Artie. How long has it been?
Actually, this is where I was going to say this is where we insert the Titanic meme.
Yes, exactly. Tim's stream, like his VODs, have completely been erased. That's how long it's been since Tim streamed.
To be
last.
fair, that only takes 2 weeks.
It's true. But we'll pretend like it doesn't. So, I'm sorry. Kyle and Error is a Tim Stream audience member, and he's also a pretty substantial Discord contributor.
Also, quickly, let me interject here and congratulate Kyle on recently reaching affiliate on Twitch.
Nice. Congrats, Kyle. That is awesome. Oh, man. Sweet. So also an affiliate on Twitch. We'll throw that in there. So Kyle says, having thought about what I would have to contribute to a listener-created episode of Dev Game Club, I wasn't really sure what I would have to add. I definitely have many, many more questions about game dev than I have unique insights to share, but having thought about it, I realized that DGC has actually had quite an impact on my life. I first found DGC in March 2018 and emailed in shortly after, asking for recommendations of game design resources. This was around the time I first became interested in creating my own game, and I was just trying to get my hands on as much advice and information about game design as I could. 5 years later, and I have in the past few weeks finally started on a first prototype for a game idea. Congratulations, Kyle. This is in no small part due to being inspired by the stories Brett, Tim, and their guests share, as well as the fantastic projects that are quite often shared by the members of the Discord community. I also realized that stumbling into watching Tim's Dark Souls streams at the end of last year, and in particular watching his epic struggle against Artorias, kicked me off on the past 7 months of Dark Souls SL1 challenge runs.
Soul level 1 for those who might not know.
Thank you. Yep, Soul level 1. I am most of the way through Dark Souls 3 now, with more challenge runs planned for the future. So this is really just a long-winded way of saying thank you to Brett, Tim, their guests, and the wonderful DGC Discord community for the inspiration, support, and all-around good times. I appreciate it more than I can say. Also, would it be a DGC episode if nobody mentioned Tim's Artorias butter knife fight?
I mean, technically it's not a DGC episode. So you could have gone with that.
I think we can. We can keep it alive. One thing I will point to here is that I think that the cast has had a very positive impact, it seems, on a lot of the members of the community, and that's why they're in the community.
Absolutely.
And the community itself, and this is not me tooting my own horn on the community at all, the community was an idea I had at one point in time when I noticed that Twitter was kind of floundering a little bit, and also just because I was like, this would be a great place for me to engage people like Calamity, Artemage, Gothic Chocobo, and a bunch of the other members that I was constantly interacting with through Twitter more regularly. So I started building out this server. I didn't have a whole lot of stuff, and then I got kind of stalled and asked a few members to come in and kind of just help to see where we could go with it. And we started building out some of the documents and stuff. And then I believe during one of the streams, Artemage, you heard about it and were like, hey, I want in as well. And I was like, well, we're not ready to go, but let's just open the floodgates and see what happens with this thing. And the Discord just took off. And the reason it took off was not because of anything I did. It was really just the fact that there was a need, there was a community, and the podcast means a lot of things to a lot of people, just like in Kyle's message here.
Yeah, you were basically Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams. For anyone old enough to get that reference.
I built it. I built it, and everybody came. And the Discord is amazing, not because of my efforts, not just because of like the mods like you and your efforts. It's amazing because all the people who have joined it are amazing and love the cast for various reasons. So thanks for this note here, Kyle, because I can definitely feel just the love pouring off of it, and it definitely resonates with me in that regard.
Yeah, I'm definitely. How
about you, Artemage?
I'm definitely very impressed with the way that we've built the community and the Discord server, where we've had nothing really that stands out as actually problematic. Because typically when you open these things up, like there's a chance where like the one person gets in and you have to worry about it. You have to consider, is it worth hamstringing the community to like deal with this? For the record, I will always say yes. Like if you make it open to everyone, you just make it unwelcome to the people who are being antagonized by the people who are making it unwelcoming. So absolutely cut it out quick. But no, like everyone on there is there for just sharing their love for this podcast and everything that entails, and just wanting to share their stories and connect with everyone, share their projects, learn more. Like it's been amazing. And like if you hadn't started it, I was definitely on the way to doing so. I've started a few for other things, like a couple of the local board game stores in the area. I've started their Discords. The one I started like just as the pandemic was starting because they didn't have one. The other one I started because when the store opened, a lot of stuff was being done through Facebook, and a lot of people didn't want to even be on Facebook. Back when Zuckerberg was the bad guy. It's amazing how these billionaires just shift as the bad guy.
Yep.
People, just figure it out. They're all the bad guy all the time. All of them.
Exactly.
There is no good billionaire. There are less bad, there is no good.
Right.
So the next contribution we have here is from Jafool, who is a regular TimStream audience member and Discord contributor, and he has provided an audio file that we're just going to let him speak for himself here with.
Some 20 years ago, I used to have a blog, back when those were things. I mean, I guess I still do, but I used to actually use it on a regular basis. Point being, back then I called it Outside Looking In. I was a student at one of those game development schools, planning to get into the industry. Long story short, too late. That didn't happen. But man, let me tell you, a couple of decades of developers blogging, including Brett, and now more than 7 years of the Dev Game Club podcast. These guys make it seem just as cool as I thought it would be when I was a kid. 7+ years now of knowledgeable and involved discussions on the choices made, sometimes not made, a whole lot of heart, and not too tiny amount of whimsy, and a few dog barks here and there. But when it comes to building a significant work of interactive art, I'm still on the outside looking in. But I gotta tell you, through the eyes of these two, thanks to podcasts like this, it's a great view. And I love games all the more for it.
Vlogs are never something that I really got into beyond like some of my vlogging on my YouTube channel, which doesn't see as much put onto it as I'd like, just because of the time and effort it takes in regards to editing some of these things. Even things just as like a stream VOD, there is a little more that goes into that than some people might realize, which is why Tim's VODs are no longer findable, beyond the fact that he's been not streaming for something like 84 years, according to the meme. So certainly, like as an outsider, trying to find these sources of knowledge, sharing it, discussed about in these places where you can find just this welcoming space to do so, it certainly does provide some comfort there, as well as just some of the idiosyncrasies of like the podcast, such as the few dog barks that Jafool particularly mentions. Hi, June, we miss you.
Yes. Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I really do enjoy the podcast as much as I do is I don't feel that it's overproduced. One, I love that Brett and Tim approach it from the perspective of we're not trying to garner any kind of profits from this. We're just wanting to share and have like this repository to dump our knowledge in because they're literally that passionate about their job. And even though I know I've read a couple of articles on like Kotaku about Brett and burnout and crunch and things like that, it speaks to the fact that he still enjoys doing this as much as he does. And Tim too, that they just want to share this podcast. They don't care about editing out the dog barks, which makes June like just a welcomed member who
an occasional third host
into the cast. Yeah, exactly. And then on top of that, like they get into the thick of something, and if they don't know, rather than just being like, oh, like this is the way it was, we know it, or stopping to look it up and having a bunch of dead air, they're just like, we don't know. Here's what we think. But you guys can point out to us if it's right or wrong, whatever. We'll carry on. And the willingness to just kind of accept that as, hey, here's what we do know, here's what we don't know, but we don't really care about what we don't know in this regard because we want to keep talking about these interesting things that we do know, makes it really enjoyable to listen to. And the other part of it is it makes the community super passionate. There's a reason why we have a wish list, and we're not expecting them to get through that wish list. But it's just like, oh man, from a development perspective, here's this game I love or enjoy. I'd love to hear them pick it apart and talk about it. And I think that really comes with like a loyalty that is born out of them being just two really relatable but incredibly knowledgeable people who make looking in through the window at their experience, their lives, and the games they play very fascinating. And it has had an impact on me and changed the way that I approach games now. Like I approach games with a lens of trying to think, what would Tim or Brett say about this? With Tim, it's usually aw geez with some of June interjected, and then the thing he actually wants to say, which I know will be insightful from like a level design kind of perspective. And with Brett, it's more the nuts and bolts, like the actual how did they find a way to do X with this particular thing? What were the limitations, and how did they find ways around those limitations? So yeah, I love it.
Yeah, definitely always appreciate those conversations and how they do stick with what they really do want to talk about when it is just a topic brought up outside the wheelhouse, and it's like, well, how can we connect it to something that we feel like we have some space to talk about it on? So that's really nice to get in with that. So who we got next?
Yep. All right, so next we have Mystery Dip, one of the regular email contributors. Mystery Dip was also like really, really, really active on Twitter, constantly going back and forth between me and him. And Mystery Dip is bringing to our attention that the Library of Congress is sponsoring a challenge to help improve public knowledge of civics. That is the rights and responsibilities of citizens. By asking video game developers to create fun, lightweight video games related to civics that incorporate Library of Congress resources, and provides a link to the Library of Congress's blog where they're advertising and requesting game devs to do this. So really this promo, I love promos like this. My company does a hackathon every year, and during the hackathon, they ask us to kind of gamify certain aspects and pieces. I work for a real estate company, and they ask the devs to create experiences similar to this where people can very quickly learn information about real estate and purchasing homes and things like that. So I love this.
So I would like to point out here that I did a small error in providing this to you. I cut out a thing just because of the way he formatted the email. He wants to know, in the process, I don't know if he's directing this specifically at us or broadly, but since it's us doing the show, we'll have to be the ones to answer. What would you make?
What would I make?
So obviously you've got some background to this, as you've just mentioned, with your company doing the regular hackathon. So you've got some things there. But let's say it was these hackathons, did they have like a target? Did they have like a subject that they bring up every year? Is it just kind of like find a concept and run?
It's pretty much just take the concept and run. But I will say, on their website here, one of the big ones they have is a picture of Oregon Trail. And I think to a point you just made, I mean, one of the things I think I would like to actually build a game about would be the branches of government. and educating. I used to work at a summer camp that brought kids in during the summer and taught them about the different branches of government. They did a model Congress, they did a Supreme Court case, and a bunch of other things where they pretended they were in the government, they were lobbying and everything. And here in the States, I think that there is a lack of knowledge and awareness about a lot of the ways that government works. And I don't want to get too political necessarily, but I do think that that is a critical piece of education that is lacking. People don't seem to understand how even their local government can impact their daily lives. The idea of what taxes can actually do in some regards. So I think I would probably do something along those lines. The other one I had was a little more tongue in cheek. Instead of Oregon Trail, it was going to be Billionaire Origin Trail, where you would choose what your wealthy parent, who basically owned like a blood diamond mine or something like that, provided you with before you made your first million. And then would basically just go on doing ridiculous things like buying a social media company and running it into the ground. And that's still percolating in the back of my mind, but I don't think that would fit with this, and I don't think the Library of Congress would necessarily appreciate it.
No, the Library of Congress is pretty capitalist serving, so I don't think I would get very far. As much as
probably not.
Maybe there are some details in there that they should pay attention to. But hey, Head in the Sand has worked for the States for what, 250 years now?
Yep.
So,
what about you, Artemis? I know you're in Canada, but
yeah, so it is a little bit different for me up here because we don't have like a Library of Congress or anything like that. Like we have a parliamentary House of Representatives, and maybe like the best I could come up with is like explaining the differences in the way that you vote for different things. So, like you still have votes for things such as your city council, your school board, all those local things. Which, by the way, anyone looking to make real changes in the policies and things like that, look into your local politics first. That's where like a lot of the ground level stuff is. That's where a lot of the things that you're going to see take effect are. If you want to get involved, that's the place to do it. Carrying on from that soapbox, though, maybe just present things such as the way that you should engage in the various political election processes, how you're going to look at them, like where is this thing a matter ascribed to, like, hey, here's a thing that you want to provide a vote on. Who do you approach for? Is it a city council thing? Is your provincial/state government? Is this something that needs to be brought up to the federal level? It's one of the sub-organizations, just a way to like say like this is the way to introduce things and get things done. So be it starting something like a signature campaign through an online thing to draw attention on a federal level, or some sort of like demonstration outside of your state/provincial capital building, things like that. Just saying, if you want things to change, these are the places to go and how to go about it. So just directing things the right way, maybe seeing some sort of like responses in there and some sort of conclusion coming out of that. Sure, it's probably going to be like something you would see with like random events and things like that, so it'd be some degree replayable, but still fairly limited. I don't know what kind of support you'd see for something like that, but like this sounds more like a game jam idea, so like you're really not going to see a lot of support for it. But
yeah,
it's there just to give an idea of like how these things happen, and who knows, some of these game jam ideas get picked up as a real thing and flushed out. So who do we have Esther Mystery Dip here? Hopefully that helps you, Mystery Dip, and maybe the guys have something they want to touch on with that at some other point. I won't promise anything. I'm not even promising this gets on the feed. So next up we have Biostats, who comes to us with an audio offering on his hits and skips for the 300 and some odd episodes of Dev Game Club. So let's let him speak for himself here. There's not a whole lot I have to say on this one myself, Mark, because this is just basically a lot of numbers thrown at you without a lot of detail as to why he feels these are hits and skips.
As Dev Game Club has put out over 350 episodes, the Discord wanted to make sure new listeners had a resource for which episodes from the back catalog to listen to, and which could be safely skipped. Here's a list of the essential episodes: 5, 10, 19, 24, 33, 44, 69 and 70, 83, 96, 110, 117, 119, 133, 136, and 137, 156, 166, 186, 188, 201 and 202, 230, 245, 255, 259, 267, 274, 294, 324 and 325, 330 and 331, 347, and finally 355. An additional short list of episodes to check out are 118, where Justin Stinnett interviews Brett and Tim, 195, Kirk Hamilton guests and shows off the new music, 202, Tim and his favorite boss, Olanax, 210, where Tim sings,
I simply remember my Metal Gear things, and then I don't feel so bad.
and 217 through 222, where the guys wax poetic with their former employees about their favorite game of all time, Republic Commando. As for identifying absolute must-listens, well, we're still waiting for one. Everything else can be safely ignored.
What are some of the standout episodes yourself that you feel is a hit or a skip particularly? Is anything stand out? Not necessarily a series, but is there a topic that stood out that they brought up in an episode or anything where it's yeah, you should definitely listen to this one, or this is not hitting things the right way?
I mean, I think, before I even answer, I think one of the things to note about this is it's probably going to be a different hit or skip list for every person. I think people are going to gravitate for one of two reasons. One, it's a game you recognize, know, and love. There's the nostalgia factor, and so you're going to feel compelled to listen to that cast regardless of what the hosts say, because you're I love this game. The other part of it is there can be some technical nuggets that the hosts provide that make games that maybe you're not even aware of or maybe not as into still incredibly fascinating to hear about. From my perspective, I'm not typically a person who will skip things. I just will listen through, and there have been so many episodes that it's hard for me to pick out any one. I'm not going to have the numbers. I'll say any of the episodes where Brett has done any of the singing reviews are obvious hits for me. Got to listen to those. The John Romero interview, listening to how he got started, how he ported that particular game or program. I forget what it was exactly. But
it was some program where he had that whole dongle set up and matching the times.
Yep.
You guys should listen to this if you have technical interest.
Oh man, it's so fascinating.
It's probably the longest interview, but it's an interview worth exploring.
Yeah, super, super incredible. Other hits for me, are going to be games that I loved. So obviously Final Fantasy IX, Metal Gear Solid, Prince of Persia, Sands of Time, Ocarina of Time. But then others were surprising. Things like Anachronox, which I have never played. But just listening to them talk about the ridiculousness of that game and some of the technical aspects of it were great for me. Any episode where June barks is an immediate hit.
So just about every.
Yeah, pretty much every episode. And then I'm trying to think. I really, really also enjoyed their Chrono Trigger series. If I'm being honest, that one was great. Just from them kind of recognizing and realizing how amazing that game gets when you start doing some of the time traveling aspects, and hearing them have that moment of wow, that part of it is pretty awesome to listen to. So yeah, those are going to be my hits. If I had to pick any skips, honestly, the skips, and they're not even really skips, would be some of the earliest episodes when they were still finding their feet with audio, and it's more technical issues.
Yeah.
When you start a podcast, when you're starting out, there's going to be things where when you get 20 episodes in, you're I would change that, and you do, and it becomes better for your listening audience. And then a lot of those first episodes, they were determining what this was going to be, but they still even have Ken Levine on, so I don't want to skip that interview because that's a pretty remarkable and awesome interview.
Definitely.
So yeah,
to the point where they even reposted it at least once.
Exactly. So honestly, my honest recommendation to people, if you're coming in, would really be to pick the games that you're the most interested in, so that you can start to settle into the groove that is Brett and Tim. getting to kind of know them, get a feel for how they approach games as hosts and everything, and then go from there, start exploring.
So the areas that I would call skips are very personal, and I mean that like to everyone. Because, for example, I have not listened to Final Fantasy IX and Planescape Torment, because these are both games that I have played to some extent and have not been able to finish through issues I've mentioned in previous emails where I've lost data and like had my progress just reset. And it's like, I don't want all this spoiled for me. This isn't something I need to experience before I hear them talk about it, but I really want to hear them talk about it. So that's what that all comes down to. So those ones have been standout skips for me because of those reasons. Given that Final Fantasy IX is something that really put them on the map with like it being mentioned in Kotaku and stuff, I imagine it's fantastic. Planescape Torment, I would say, is the best of the Infinity Engine D&D games. Everyone should play it. It'll give you like an even like more comprehensive version of the D&D rules, since it was given better English translation than just 1d4. You actually have 1 to 4 showing as your damage and things like that. It's a huge difference, and the story is just... I do not have words to describe just how creatively fantastic and the impact that this story has is definitely... go and play it. If you haven't played it yet, skip the episodes if you haven't, and just play it first. Beyond that, some of the hits for me... one's a bit of a silly one, and that was the interview with Bill Roper during the Warcraft series, who was the voice of all the Warcraft things. So the big highlight there is just the story of how they threw in those annoyed responses without telling everyone. It was him and the one programmer. It's like, we're doing this, and it's going to be great. And it was. It was freaking fantastic. Like, I remember my first experience just finding it accidentally. It was just me, like, thinking things through and just idly clicking on one guy, and he starts responding, like, with not an acknowledgement, but, like, a question of like, more ears, like, what? I'm like, excuse me? Was that something you discovered yourself, or did somebody tell you about it?
Somebody told me about that. I wasn't as much of a WoW player, but it was definitely something I like heard about or read about. So that did not hit with me as much. But what you're saying is resonating with me, because there have been a couple of interviews that have been somewhat similar in that regard, to where I've had those moments.
Another one that I would say is like a standout interview. Like, obviously, Robin Miller is the one that got me into the cast in the first place, but you also have like some big legends in there, like Dave Grossman and Tim Schafer at the end of the Dave the Tentacle series. Like, those guys are just legends, and like I can't think of anything they've done that has not been a draw to me somehow. And certainly with them having worked on it, like their Republic Commando series and all the interviews they get there, and you get to explore that with such intimate familiarity with the game, it's really a whole different experience, and set a really different bar for the show that it's going to be hard for them to replicate, and I don't think they should try. Like, that is not saying, guys, go back to this high bar. That's not possible. Do not chase that, guys. You will just burn yourselves out. It is not fair. So that's where I'll leave that. But yeah, that's definitely where I'd say like a lot of the stands out are like, it's great to hear them discover things in the episodes during the series themselves, and just all the ways that they encounter different things in the systems. But like when they get to like really break things down and hear these cool stories and things like that with the guys they interview, it's just a whole different thing on like relating things in the industry. Going back around to Bill Roper for a second, I actually had heard him before the podcast because I was recommended the Poxy Boggards, the band he's part of, by Spotify at one point. And going back to Drunk Souls, they have a song in there that I've gotten permission to use eventually for when I get some assets together for a Drunk Souls thing. So pay attention to my YouTube channel for when that comes around. Go ahead and explore their back library if you want to try and figure it out yourself.
Awesome.
It is. So who do we have next? I believe this is you, Mark.
Okay, here we go. All right. So, hey, DGC fam. I'm Daniel, a.k.a. as friend of the podcast, Baron. I'm super excited to be part of this homage bonus family episode that Art and Mark put together. I find it super cute and a perfect way to show how much we appreciate what Brett and Tim do and the awesome community they have created. I don't want to take too long, just going to say thank you, and I'm happy to share my passion for video games with you lot. Praise the sun,
and that's
Baron.
And that's, I believe, the last that we have from the community here.
Well, thanks for that, Baron. Yes, definitely kind of echo the sentiment.
Yeah, definitely reached out to like everyone I could think of who did some regular contributions in some form or another. Some who couldn't make it for various reasons, including Calamity, Gothic Chocobo, calling the shots, just a few, obviously. But I think Colin's had enough going on with his essay of various breakdowns that I don't think he felt the need to contribute too much more. But yeah, like this was something that was very much thrown together to just say thanks to the big contributors, and this may be something going forward. We'll see what Brett and Tim have to say, because my idea for this was, you guys don't have an episode coming out, here's a break, you don't have to worry about producing something, just put this on instead, and if you want this to fall back on, we're probably happy to do it again. And if that's the case, we can certainly welcome more interaction with the community at large, so more people get a chance to interact.
Yep, absolutely. I'm always down for stuff like this.
All right. So, Mark, why don't you tell the people what you are working on, where they can find you, things like that, as we sign off here?
Yeah, so people can find me no longer on Twitter. I have officially left, well, I guess it's X now, whatever it's called. I've left
the Musk
dumpster
Nazi
fire.
platform.
Yes, exactly. I've left that dumpster fire. I am on Threads. I'm not going to promote my personal account there, though, because I'm not really doing a whole lot that promotes myself, but I'll be in the Discord as Oh Hi Mark. What I'm working on currently from a personal perspective is, I do a couple of Photoshop pieces here and there, do a bunch of web development stuff. I'm a full stack developer, so I can build front ends and back ends of websites and things like that. So I've got a couple of web apps. And currently the big thing I'm working on is, like I was talking about earlier today, that Tiger Electronics game I'm converting, Lights Out. Currently building it as a web-based application, but then I'm going to try my luck at turning it into a React Native application in the hopes of launching it on the Android and iOS store somewhere in the foreseeable future. So I'll be posting in the Dev Game channel for the community on the Discord as time goes on. Any Photoshops I do and my progress on that game, so that people can kind of keep in touch with where it is. How about you, Artemidge? What are you up to?
Well, like you, I have left behind the Musk dumpster fire, just because hearing him by it and seeing his past failures is like, yeah, I don't need to get caught in this inferno. So I am also on Threads, I am on Blue Sky, I am on Instagram, I am on Facebook, all at Artemidge84, where you can also find me on Twitch, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday most weeks from 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I go for 2 or 3 hours, depending, usually only about 2, because I work nights, and unless it's Friday, it means I'm going from stream to work. I'm, of course, doing my Extra Life efforts, where you can find me at extralife.org/participant/Artemidge, no 84 in this case, where all my efforts go to support McMaster Children's Hospital here in Hamilton, Ontario. Chosen in part, yes, because they are local, but primarily because they have a robust juvenile psychiatric care program, and mental health is a big part of what I do. Like, gaming is a big part of my own personal mental health well-being as somebody with bipolar disorder, and likely having recently discovered probably ADHD. We're working on a diagnosis for that. And as well, sometimes interacting with the folks at the Nix Cast, primarily with their charity raising money for Trans Lifeline, the Race Against Time, which will probably have occurred by the time you guys hear this, but you'll find it promoted in the Discord before then, where they play Chrono Trigger over the course of 24 hours, trying to get all endings and raise money for that charity, which does micro grants and a support hotline in English and Spanish for trans people in Canada and the US. And I think that's about everything I have to touch on for myself, aside from my work on my streams and my Extra Life stuff, which I promote as I go.
Awesome.
So we want to thank Brett and Tim so much for all the effort they've put into the show for the years and the constant content, especially with the fact that I seem to be a background producer, having gotten at least 3 of my games onto the show that I've suggested. For those of you,
nice.
For those of you unaware, it's Morrowind, Dead Space, and I jokingly suggested Dwarf Fortress, and then we saw a very interesting series with that, where they looked at the changes over the different versions. I don't think they got the chance to do that one as well as we would have liked to have seen, but I'm glad they still did it.
Yep.
You can, of course, find the ongoing dumpster fire that is the Discord server linked in the show notes. And the show can be found at devgameclub.com. And don't forget to email Brett and Tim at devgameclub@gmail.com.
Yep. And that Discord server is, the community's constantly growing. We've got a great set of mods, and we're constantly adding stuff to it. We've got a couple of personalized bots in there that will help things. One of the new ones, and I forgot to mention this during my What's Coming Up, is I am working on a bot that is going to give us an exact count of the last time, from the last time that Tim streamed to present day. And I'm going to try and get that set up so that it is posting daily. Somewhere in one of the channels, so that we always know it's been this many days and hours and minutes since Tim has last streamed. So look for that coming in the future.
I mean, you've got the Twitch stream feed, so I could certainly just be putting that. And then maybe if we're feeling really spicy, we'll also do it for Brett, because it's been longer since he streamed. Like, I think summer 2021.
It's true. It's true. So we'll see what we can do.
Great. So with that said, everyone, have fun with your own Dev Game Club journey, and good night.
Good night.
Brettim, Brettentum, Brettim and Brettentum, Brettim, Brettentum. This is not them.